Well, you must really like the sound of my voice, because boy, do I have a story for you. This is a follow-up video to our basic sort of drainage installation video for the bathroom sink. So if you haven't seen that, this might be out of context, so I'll leave a card to that and also a link in the description. So basically, to follow up, the straight drain, we wanted to just get it underneath the house and deal with the drainage under there. And our first attempt, which we knew was just going to be temporary, it was just an attempt to slap something together so that we could start using the drain, well, both sinks, the bathroom sink and the kitchen sink. And it consisted of basically a container that acted as a gray water buffer tank, where both the tubes, there was flexible tubing from both sinks, would come into the container, and then it had another like hose that would come off of it and run to a tree that was just gravity drained. And it was such that, you know, as we drained water and it filled up the buffer tank and then it drained out to the tree, it wouldn't drain all the way down to empty. There'd be a bit of standing gray water in that tank. And the drainage tubing that came from the sinks, the ends of them would be such that they would be underneath that bit of standing water, so that would be an air seal on the far end of the tubing. And so my thinking was that if there's an air seal on the tubing and air can't, you know, come up through that way or escape that way, there can be no movement of air through the piping, and thus, you know, no air, nasty smelling air coming up out of the drain. But it turns out that we were smelling stuff, nasty smells coming out of the drain, because there's so much open tubing between here and the far end that went into that buffer tank. And it's all, of course, you know, getting wastewater drained down inside it, and it's all nasty and has residue and everything depositing on the inside of that tubing. And because there's such a length of it, it's enough that it can allow for the movement of some smells. So we realized that what we really needed was an air seal close to the drain. And of course, that's how all drains are. You know, we're trying to reinvent the wheel here, but the reason that you have a P-trap or some kind of water seal or water-based air seal right underneath your drain is so that, you know, you've only got like this less than a foot of piping between the drain and where it's sealed. So that's what prompted us to install the S-trap here, to get a air seal nice and close to the drain to block the smells from coming up. And as I mentioned in the previous video, it is actually working surprisingly well, even though I know that the S-trap is not ideal compared to a P-trap. And so that's sort of the second part I want to get into is drainage venting, and how we basically don't have any. With an S-trap, the advantage is that in a very small space, you can have a drainage pipe that comes down, you can do a quick S-turn, and then continue heading straight down. And you get that dip in the tubing where water will stay and seal off you know, backdrafts from the rest of the drainage system. But those are not as good as P-traps, because the way a P-trap works is that you've got that same dip where the water stays and creates an air seal, but then the pipe goes off horizontal, like it's slightly angled down, but it's basically horizontally to a vertical pipe that is at a T. So when you're draining the water, you know, flows along that horizontal bit and then it goes down, but it's also wide open all the way up and usually shoots straight through the roof. And the reason for this is that it's easy to forget, but air is a substance that takes up space. And so, you know, if no one's drained anything for several minutes and the whole drainage system is empty, all the pipes are empty, there is air in there. And when you drain water and it goes into those pipes, you're adding a substance into a fixed volume that already contains a bunch of air. So that air wants to get pushed out of the way. So it'll get either, get pressurized, or it'll find a way, or it'll find a way to escape. And those vertical vents allow for that. So if you've ever been up on a roof and especially while someone is running water down the drain, you're going to smell that nasty sewage smell, because all the air that's being displaced by the water that's being drained is getting forced, and that's where it's supposed to go. That's the purpose of those vents, is to allow it to escape. And then, of course, when you're done draining and then the water, trickles down and it goes to its final destination, now you need to refill the pipe with air that the water had been taking place while it was draining, so then that vent can suck the air back in. Now, the reason that we don't have a vent through the roof, we actually purposely planned not to have one, we didn't install any of the piping for it or anything, is that since our loft is right up there near the roof and we have windows that open also right up near the roof, I was worried that with a vent like that, under the right wind conditions or maybe temperature or humidity or whatever, that we could get that nasty smell wafting into the loft where we sleep. So I figured we'd just come up with some alternate solution to the drainage and not have a vent. But of course, this is proving to be a bit of a challenge, and with our drainage setup that we have now, which is, it's not perfect by any means. I'll actually link a video to our most recent sort of overview of what we have set up for now. But the way that it is the very far end where the water reaches its final destination is in a sort of a dug pit, which for a lot of the year here, because it's so wet, is underwater, like both from the water that we're draining out, but also when it rains, it keeps it topped up. And the end of that tube is sealed. So there is an air seal at the far end of our drainage, which means that since that's sealed, and then we do have these S-traps on the sink ends, that there's nowhere for that air to go when we drain water into the tubing, and that air wants to go somewhere. It has nowhere to go because we have no vent and it's sealed on both ends. So essentially, we pressurize that nasty piping air every time we're draining water down. And the thing with and the fact that we have S-traps is that it's just water that's blocking the air, and if the air reaches a high enough pressure from it wanting to displace, it can potentially bubble through that air seal that we have in the S-trap and bubble out. Now, there's been a handful of times where I'm not sure exactly what the conditions were that caused it, but we have experienced a few times where we have smelled stuff come back up to the sink. But the vast majority of the time, what we have now is holding back that pressurized drainage air. But I think what would be better, and might actually just be like a total solution for what we have in place right now, is to replace the S-traps with flexible, sort of rubberized one-way valves. And so that's a product that's marketed for RVs, especially for when you store an RV for a long period, and the water that's in your whatever type of trap you have there can evaporate, and then you can have nasty smells like wafting back into your like stored RV, and then when you go to open it after months, it's like full of nasty like whatever your holding tank, especially if it's like a black water tank too. Even if you'd have to like clean it super well, because whatever smell or whatever was left in that tank can then just waft back up through your drainage. So anyway, the reason that these rubberized valves are marketed for that purpose in particular is one of the things that they can be useful for, is that the rubber can never evaporate. Obviously, it's what's preventing the movement of air, and it's also applicable. Like the reason I'm bringing it up for this our application is that it can't be bubbled back through by pressurized drainage air. So without really making any other changes to the really simple sort of tubing system that we have right now, if we just replaced our S-traps with the one-way rubber valves, I think it could actually just work, and that might be the sort of best alternate solution, alternate to having the standard vent stacks that go through the roof. One other thing that I thought of as sort of a thought experiment, and it's something that I might try in real life, and I wanted to run it by you guys to see what you thought of sort of the physics of this, if this would even work, is to basically, like, we've got the two drains from the two sinks that meet up at a T, and then they run off to the final drainage tube. So I could just add another T down there and take essentially like a heavy plastic bag and put that as the connection that, you know, that T is going to, and seal that, so that when we drain water down there and it wants to displace the air that's in the tubing, it can go, you know, gently inflate the plastic bag, and then when the water is done flowing and it wants to pull air back in to fill up that volume, the plastic bag can just give the air back. So it's basically, it would act like a vent does, where it just, the air can go out and then flow back in, but it's contained so that it can be down at basically ground level, where normally that would be just puffing out a bunch of nasty smells that you would smell just being anywhere near it. But, you know, being contained in a bag, it just contains the odors. So that's something I might experiment with in the meantime, because I do want to put those valves in, the one-way membrane valves, but we'll have to get around to, you know, ordering those and then finding time to install them, which is not a super high priority because the S-traps, even as they are now, are working sufficiently that it's not like a major concern right now. So there you have it. There's a lot of rambling about drainage, about our experiences, challenges, and the learning process that we've gone through. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. I'd love to hear what knowledge you guys have or experience with drainage in general, but also especially if you have your own tiny house, do you have a vent penetrated through your roof? And what is your drainage connected to? Is it connected to a septic? Do you have your own little drainage kind of pit like we do? Are you connected to a sewer system, like a city system? Do you have a flush toilet or a composting toilet? What are all the, you know, the attributes of your drainage system? Do you have a vent? And have you ever smelled it? Is it an actual concern? Because it's something that I was worried about, but I don't actually know how it performs in the real world. So let us know.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you like what we're doing here, and turn on email notifications so you never miss a video. You can also find extra resources in the description below.
We spend countless hours making these videos for YouTube, so if you appreciate our work, take 3 minutes to watch the video in the top left tile to learn some ways that you can support us for free.
We'd really appreciate it.